The sky turned green first. That was always the warning. Day one looked up from his equipment panel and watched through the reinforced window as the clouds shifted color. He had been on planet Veldar for 8 months now, long enough to know what green clouds meant. The acid rain was coming. He checked his environmental suit hanging by the airlock. Everything looked good. The suit could handle the rain for about 6 hours before the seals started to weaken. Day one hoped he would not need it today. He had 3 more soil samples to process, and the rain would trap him inside the shelter station for at least 2 days. Outside, the Velthani were already moving. Day one watched them through his window. They looked like walking lizards taller than humans, with dark green scales that covered their bodies. Their scales protected them from the acid rain, but they still did not like being out in it. They were heading toward the underground entrances, moving in organized groups. Today was special. Today was hatching day. Day one had learned about this from Kyung Min, one of the Velthani engineers who sometimes worked near a station. Once every year, the Velthani laid their eggs in the breeding grounds on the surface. The eggs needed the natural heat from the rocks and the thin atmosphere. When the eggs hatched, the adults came up to collect their young and bring them underground before the seasonal rains began. The timing was always close. Nature did not care about convenience. Day one counted 15 adult Velthani moving across the rocky breeding ground. Each one carried 2 or 3 small hatchlings. The babies were tiny, maybe the size of house cats, with soft scales and large eyes. They made chirping sounds that Day one could hear even through the thick walls of the station. The first drops of rain began to fall. Where the drops hit the rock, small wisps of smoke rose up. The rain was not pure acid, but it was strong enough to burn through most organic materials. The Velthani moved faster now, their long legs carrying them toward the sealed tunnel entrance 200 meters away. Day one turned back to his work. The Velthani had their own ways, their own systems. He was just here to study the soil and help determine if humans could terraform parts of this world. It was not his place to interfere with their culture. His sensor array beeped. Day one frowned and looked at the screen. The biological scanner was picking up something. A life sign, small, on the surface, moving. He checked the Velthani groups through the window. They had all reached the tunnel entrance. The large metal door was sliding closed behind the last of them. The rain was falling harder now, and the rocks were steaming where the water touched them. The life sign was still there, still moving, getting weaker. Day one pulled up the exact location on his map, 3 kilometers west of his position, right in the middle of the breeding grounds. Something alive was still out there. He looked at his environmental suit, then at the rain hammering against his window, then back at the screen. It was probably just an animal, some local creature that wandered into the wrong place. The Velthani would not leave one of their own behind. They were very careful about their young. The life sign flickered. Weaker now. Day one swore under his breath. He grabbed his suit and started pulling it on. The protocol manual was very clear. Human engineers did not go outside during acid rain unless it was a critical emergency. This was not a critical emergency. This was probably nothing. But his hands kept moving, sealing the suit, checking the seals twice, activating the helmet's display. The station's computer voice spoke. Warning. Environmental conditions are hazardous. Recommend remaining inside shelter. Yeah, I know, Day one said. He grabbed the emergency medical kit from the wall and clipped it to his belt. He had no idea what he would find out there, but if something was alive and injured, he might be able to help. The airlock cycled. Rain hammered against the outer door. Day one took a breath and stepped outside. The rain hit him immediately. He could hear it sizzling against his suit. The heads-up display showed the suit integrity at 98%. Good. He had time. Day one started walking west, following the map on his display. The breeding ground was a flat area covered in dark rocks. In the crevices between the rocks, he could see the remains of broken eggshells. The Velthani had been here recently, collecting their young. The life sign was close now. 50 meters. 30. 10. Then he saw it. Under a small rock overhang, pressed against the stone, was a Velthani hatchling. But this one was different. Its scales were not the normal dark green. They were pure white. Albino. The hatchling was making small crying sounds. Its white scales were already showing red marks where the rain had touched it. The little creature saw Day one and tried to crawl deeper under the rock, but it was too weak. Day one knelt down slowly. Hey, there, he said softly. It's okay. I'm going to help you. The hatchling hissed at him, frightened. Its large amber eyes were filled with fear and pain. Day one pulled out a protective thermal sheet from his medical kit. Moving slowly, he reached toward the hatchling. It tried to bite him, but its tiny teeth could not penetrate the suit. Day one wrapped the sheet around the small body and lifted it. The hatchling weighed almost nothing. It trembled in his arms, still making those small crying sounds. "I've got you," Day one said. "Let's get you somewhere safe." He turned and started walking back toward the station. The rain was falling harder now. His suit integrity was at 89%. He had maybe 2 hours before he needed to worry. Plenty of time. The hatchling stopped struggling after a minute. It seemed to understand that Day one was not trying to hurt it. The little creature pressed against his chest, seeking warmth. Back at the station, Day one cycled through the airlock and carefully unwrapped the hatchling on his medical table. The burns on its white scales looked painful. He sprayed them with medical gel, the universal kind that worked on most carbon-based life forms. The hatchling watched him with those large amber eyes. It was still scared, but it held still while he worked. "You're going to be okay," Day one said. He had no idea if the creature could understand him, but his voice seemed to calm it. While the gel worked, Day one activated his translation software and pointed the scanner at the hatchling. The device could analyze biological sounds and attempt to translate them. It was not perfect, but it worked with most species. The results appeared on his screen. Day one read them once, then read them again. According to the scanner, the hatchling was making sounds that translated roughly to "Why did they leave me?" and "Mother, where?" Day one felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was not an accident. This was not a mistake. He accessed the station's cultural database and searched for information about Velthani breeding practices. What he found made his jaw tighten. Albino hatchlings were considered genetic defects. They lacked the protective pigmentation needed to survive on Veldar. According to tradition, such hatchlings were left behind during the collection. It was considered a mercy. Better to die quickly in the rain than to live as a burden. Day one looked at the small white creature on his table. It was looking back at him with intelligent, aware eyes. Eyes that knew it had been abandoned. "No," Day one said quietly. "Not on my watch." He picked up the hatchling gently and carried it to the small sleeping area in the back of the station. He made a nest of blankets and set the creature down. It curled up immediately, exhausted. Day one sat and watched it sleep. His mind was already working through problems. The regulations, the cultural issues, the fact that he had just interfered with an indigenous species' practices. Outside, the acid rain continued to fall. Inside, a small white hatchling slept peacefully for the first time in its short life, safe in the shelter of a human who decided that some things were more important than rules. 3 months had passed since the day Day one found the hatchling in the rain. He had named it Taemin, inspired by how small and delicate it looked when he first brought it inside. Now, Taemin was not so small anymore. The young Velthani had grown to the size of a large dog. Its white scales had healed completely from the acid burns and now gleamed like pearl in the station's lights. Taemin followed Day one everywhere, watching everything he did with curious amber eyes. "Hand me that wrench," Day one said, pointing at the tool on the table. Taemin looked at the table, then picked up the wrench with its 3-fingered hand and gave it to Day one. The young Velthani made a soft chirping sound that Day one had learned meant satisfaction or happiness. "Good job," Day one said, scratching behind Taemin's head ridge. The hatchling leaned into the touch and made a purring sound. Day one still could not believe how smart Taemin was. At first, he thought the hatchling was just mimicking his actions, like a parrot copying sounds. But after a few weeks, he realized Taemin actually understood what it was doing. The young Velthani could follow simple instructions, recognize different tools, and even solve basic problems. Yesterday, Taemin had figured out how to open the food storage by itself. Day one found it sitting inside the cabinet, eating protein bars and looking very pleased. "You're too clever for your own good," Day one had said, but he was not really angry. It was hard to be angry at Taemin. The problem was keeping the hatchling hidden. Day one had not reported the rescue to his supervisors yet. He knew he should have done it immediately, but every time he reached for the communication panel, he stopped. What would they do with Taemin? Send it back to the Velthani, who would probably just abandon it again. Send it to some research facility where it would spend its life being studied? Neither option felt right. So Day one kept quiet and hoped no one would visit his station unexpectedly. For 3 months, it had worked, but his luck was about to run out. The communication panel beeped. Day one looked at it and felt his stomach drop. An incoming transport. Arrival time, 2 hours. He pulled up the details. Dr. Jihai Park, xenobiologist. Scheduled survey. Authorized by the Interstellar Development Coalition. Day one had forgotten about the quarterly biological surveys. Every 3 months, a xenobiologist came to check on the local ecosystem and make sure the terraforming plans would not damage any protected species. Taemin, Day one said urgently. The young Velthani looked up from the corner where it was organizing spare parts by size. We have a problem. For the next 2 hours, Day one tried everything he could think of to hide Taemin. He considered the storage room, but it was too small and had no ventilation. He thought about the equipment bay, but Jihai would need to access it for her survey. Finally, he settled on the small maintenance crawlspace under the station's main floor. It was uncomfortable, but Taemin could breathe and move around a little. You need to stay quiet, Day one told the hatchling. Very quiet, just for a few hours. Can you do that? Taemin tilted its head, then made a soft sound that Day one had learned meant yes or agreement. The young Velthani climbed into the crawlspace without complaint. Day one had just sealed the access panel when the transport landed outside. Dr. Jihai Park was a short woman with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. She carried 3 cases of survey equipment and declined Day one's offer help. I know where everything is, she said. I have done this survey 20 times on different stations. You can continue your work. Just pretend I am not here. That would have been easier if Taemin had actually stayed quiet. Jihai was examining a soil sample when they both heard it. A soft chirping sound coming from underfloor. Jihai froze. What was that? Old pipes, Day one said quickly. The station makes all sorts of noises. You get used to it. Jihai did not look convinced, but she went back to her sample. 5 minutes later, the sound came again, louder this time. Those are very musical pipes, Jihai said dryly. She set down her equipment and walked to the center of the room. Engineer Kong, is there something you need to tell me? Day one considered lying. He considered claiming he had no idea what she was talking about. But Jihai was already kneeling by the access panel, her scanner in hand. There's a large biological entity under this floor, she said, reading her scanner. Carbon-based, reptilian, Velthani genetic markers. She looked up at Day one. Would you like to explain why you have a Velthani hidden in your maintenance base? There was no point in hiding it anymore. Day one opened the access panel. Taemin climbed out, looking apologetic. The young Velthani chirped softly and pressed against Day one's leg. Jihai stared. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. That is an albino hatchling. Yes, Day one said. Those are always abandoned. The Velthani leave them to die in the acid rain. I know. You rescued it during the last rain season. Yes. And you have been hiding it here for 3 months. Yes. Jihai sat down heavily on a chair. She looked at Taemin, who looked back at her with curious eyes. Do you have any idea how many regulations you've broken? Several. Day one admitted. Try 37, Jihai said. I can think of 37 regulations off the top of my head. Probably more if I actually checked the manual. She rubbed her face. Why did you do this? Because it was the right thing to do. Day one said simply. I found Taemin crying in the rain. Its scales were burning. It was scared and alone. What was I supposed to do? Leave it there to die? It is not our place to interfere with indigenous cultural practices, Jihai said, but her voice was not as firm as her words. She was still looking at Taemin. Even when those practices involve leaving children to die. Day one asked. It is more complicated than that, Jihai said. The Velthani believe the albino gene carries harmful mutations. They think they are preventing suffering by killing babies. Day one interrupted. Let's call it what it is. Taemin made a questioning sound. The hatchling could not understand all their words yet, but it could sense the tension in the room. It looked between the two humans nervously. Jihai stood up and walked closer to Taemin. The young Velthani watched her, but did not back away. May I? She asked Day one. You can try. Taemin is friendly, but careful with strangers. Jihai held out her hand slowly. Taemin sniffed it, then gently touched it with its snout. Jihai smiled slightly. How intelligent is it? Very, Day one said. He demonstrated by asking Taemin to fetch different tools. The hatchling brought each one correctly. Then Day one showed Jihai how Taemin had learned to organize equipment and even assist with simple repairs. Jihai watched it all with an unreadable expression. Finally, she said, "This changes things." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Taemin is not just a rescued animal. This is a sentient being, one that has been learning and developing under your care." Jihai crossed her arms. "The Velthani are going to find out eventually. When they do, they will demand Taemin back. And according to the cultural sovereignty agreements, we have to return it to them." "No," Day One said flatly. "I will not do that. You might not have a choice." They stared at each other for a long moment. Taemin chirped softly, confused by the tension. Jihai sighed. "I should report this immediately. That is what the regulations say I should do." "But," Day One asked, hearing the hesitation in her voice. "But I am going to need at least a week to complete my survey," Jihai said slowly, "and my communication equipment seems to be malfunctioning. It might take me several days to fix it." Day One understood. She was giving him time. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet," Jihai said. "Use this time to figure out what you're going to do, because when the Velthani find out about this, and they will find out, there's going to be serious trouble." She was right. 2 days later, the trouble arrived in the form of a Velthani maintenance crew, and one of them was Kyung Min, the engineer who sometimes worked near the station. Kyung Min saw Taemin through the window. Those amber eyes went wide, the white scales gleaming in the light. There was no mistaking what it was. Day One watched Kyung Min's face and knew his time was up. The secret was out. Within hours, the Velthani Council sent a formal message. They wanted Taemin returned immediately. They used words like aberration and proper resolution and cultural sovereignty. They gave Day One 48 hours to comply. Day One looked at Taemin, who was curled up in the corner, sensing something was wrong. The young Velthani looked back at him with trust in those amber eyes. "I will not let them take you," Day One promised quietly. "I do not know how yet, but I will find a way." Jihai, standing nearby, said, "Then we better start looking for legal options, because if we're going to fight this, we need to do it properly." The next 2 days would determine everything. The deadline came and went. Day One did not hand over Taemin. Instead, he sealed the station's outer doors and activated the emergency lockdown protocols. It was technically against regulations, but he claimed there was a malfunction in the environmental systems. No one could prove otherwise without forcing their way in, and that would take time. Jihai had left the station before the lockdown, but she had not abandoned them. She spent those 2 days researching everything she could find about Velthani law and history. What she discovered gave them a slim chance. The abandonment practice is only 3,000 years old. Jihai explained over the communication link. Before that, albino Velthani were accepted in their society. Rare but accepted. "What changed?" Day One asked. He was sitting on the floor with Taemin, who was listening to the conversation with focused attention. The young Velthani was learning more human words every day. "A plague," Jihai said. "A terrible disease that killed thousands. Some religious leader claimed it was punishment for allowing albinos to live. The idea stuck. Within a generation, it became tradition. So it is based on superstition," Day One said. "All traditions start somewhere," Jihai replied. "The question is whether we can challenge it legally." That was when Hannah arrived. She was a human lawyer who specialized in interspecies rights, and she had heard about Day One's situation through the colony network. She came to the station in person, walking right past the Velthani delegation that had gathered outside. "I am here to represent Engineer Kong and his ward," Hannah announced to the Velthani. "Any further communication should go through me." The Velthani delegation was led by Hajin, a tall Velthani with dark green scales and cold eyes. He looked at Hannah with barely concealed contempt. "The human has no ward. He has stolen property that belongs to our people." "Taemin is not property," Hannah said calmly. "Taemin is a living sentient being. And according to the Interspecies Cooperation Treaty, Article 7, any sentient being has a right to request protection if their life is in immediate danger." "The aberration was never in danger from us," Hajin said. "We simply allowed nature to take its course." "You left a child to die in acid rain," Hannah said. Her voice remained calm, but her eyes were hard. "That is not nature. That is a choice." The argument went back and forth for hours. Finally, Hannah made her formal request. She wanted a tribunal hearing under the Interspecies Cooperation Treaty. It was a rarely used provision that allowed for challenges to indigenous practices that conflicted with universal sentient rights. Hajin was furious. "You have no right to judge our culture. Humans have no moral authority to tell us how to live." "Then let neutral judges decide," Hannah said. If your practice is justified, you have nothing to fear from a hearing. Hajin could not refuse without looking like he had something to hide. Reluctantly, he agreed to the tribunal. The news spread quickly through both the human and Velthani communities. Reactions were mixed. Many humans supported Day One, calling him a hero, but others worried about setting a dangerous precedent. What right did humans have to interfere with alien cultures? Among the Velthani, the response was even stronger. Most saw it as an insult, an attack on their way of life. But a very few, remained quiet. They remembered their own doubts, their own questions about the old traditions. Kyungmin was one of them. The engineer had reported seeing Taemin because he thought it was his duty, but he had not stopped thinking about the white hatchling since then. He remembered how it had stood beside Daewon, helping with the work like any young Velthani would help their parent. It reminded him of his own children. The tribunal was scheduled to take place in a neutral station orbiting Veldar. 3 judges would hear the case. One was a Centauran diplomat named Remshala, known for being fair but strict. The second was a human judge named Park Sung-ho, who had experience with interspecies law. The third was a Velthani legal elder named Boare, from a different clan than the Brewkeepers. Day One, Taemin, and Hannah traveled to the station together. Jihai came too, bringing all her research data. As they boarded the transport, Day One noticed Taemin was nervous. The young Velthani had never left the surface station before. "It will be okay," Day One said softly, putting his hand on Taemin's shoulder. "I promise." Taemin looked up at him and made a soft sound that meant trust. The tribunal chamber was a large circular room with the 3 judges sitting at an elevated platform. Below them were 2 tables, one for each side. Hajin sat at one with 2 other Velthani advisors. Day One, Hannah, and Jihai sat at the other. Taemin sat between Day One and Hannah, looking small and afraid. Judge Remshala opened the proceedings. Her voice was calm and measured. "We are here to determine whether the Velthani practice of abandoning albino hatchlings conflicts with universal sentient rights. Both sides will present their arguments. We will listen and then make our decision." Hajin spoke first. He was an impressive speaker, his voice deep and commanding. He explained the history of the practice, the belief that albino genetics carried dangerous mutations. He showed medical records from 3,000 years ago, during the plague time, that seemed to support the connection. "We do not do this out of cruelty," Hajin said. "We do this to protect our species. The albino gene weakens us. It makes us vulnerable. If we allow these aberrations to breed, they will spread their defect through our population. Thousands could die." It was a powerful argument. Day One felt his hopes sinking. Then Hannah stood up. "May I present our medical evidence?" Jihai came forward with her data. She had spent weeks analyzing Taemin's genetics, comparing them to normal Velthani DNA. Her findings were clear. There is no genetic defect. Jihai explained. The albino gene in Velthani is a simple recessive trait that affects pigmentation only. It does not cause immune deficiency. It does not carry disease. The medical records from the plague time show correlation, not causation. The plague affected everyone equally. Albinos were blamed because they were different, not because they were actually spreading disease. Hajin objected immediately. "This is human science. How can you trust it over 3,000 years of Velthani knowledge?" "Because science does not care about tradition," Jihai said firmly. "The data is clear. The belief that albinos carry disease is false. It has always been false." Judge Boare, the Velthani elder, leaned forward. "These are serious claims. Do you have proof that can be verified independently?" "Yes," Jihai said. "I provided all my research data. Any qualified geneticist can review it. The results will be the same." The tribunal continued for hours. Witnesses testified on both sides. Day One told his story of finding Taemin in the rain. He described how intelligent and capable the young Velthani had proven to be. "Taemin is not an aberration," Day One said. "Taemin is a person, a young person who deserves a chance to live." Hajin countered with passionate arguments about cultural sovereignty. "Humans have no right to impose their values on us. You have your own history of atrocities, your own shameful practices, yet you come here and judge us? This is colonialism wearing a mask of compassion." Several Velthani in the observation area voiced their agreement. Hajin's words had struck a chord. The fear of losing their identity, their right to govern themselves, was real and justified. Then something unexpected happened. Kyungmin stood up from the observation area. "I wish to testify." Hajin turned, surprised. "Kyungmin?" What are you doing? I am exercising my right to speak, Kyung-min said. He walked to the center of the chamber. I am the one who first saw the albino hatchling at the human station. I reported it because I thought it was my duty. And it was, Ha-jin said, you did the right thing. Did I? Kyung-min asked. He looked at Tae-min, who looked back at him with those large amber eyes. I watched that hatchling work beside the human engineer. I saw how it learned, how it helped. It reminded me of my own children when they were that age. Your children are normal, Ha-jin said dismissively. This is different. Is it? Kyung-min asked. I have been thinking about this for weeks, about why we leave the albinos behind. My grandfather once told me that his grandfather questioned the practice, that in the old days before the plague, albinos were valued for their unique abilities. But those stories were forgotten, buried. We stopped asking why and just accepted what we were told. Ha-jin's expression darkened. You will betray your own people for sentiment? I am not betraying anyone, Kyung-min said. I am asking questions. That is not betrayal. That is wisdom. The chamber fell silent. The three judges looked at each other, having a quiet conversation with their eyes. Then Judge Remshala spoke. We will hear from a hatchling. Everyone turned to look at Tae-min. The young Velthani had been quiet throughout the proceedings, but Day One knew Tae-min understood more than most people realized. Hannah had prepared for this possibility. She had a translation device ready. Tae-min had been practicing. The young Velthani stood up slowly and approached the judges. In halting Velthani, translated by the device, Tae-min spoke. I do not understand why I am wrong. I can think. I can learn. I can help. Why does the color of my scales make me less? I want to know my people. I want to learn what I am. If I am truly broken, let me see it myself. Let me choose my own path. The words were simple, but they carried weight. This was not a human arguing for Velthani rights. This was a Velthani child asking for a chance to live. Judge Boare had tears in her eyes. Judge Sung-ho was writing notes furiously. Judge Remshala's face remained impassive, but something flickered in her expression. We will deliberate, Remshala announced. This tribunal is adjourned for 3 days. As they left the chamber, Day One put his hand on Tae-min's shoulder. You did well. Very well. Tae-min leaned against him, exhausted, scared. The young Velthani said in simple human words. Me too, Day One admitted. Me too. The next 3 days would change everything. 3 days felt like 3 years. Day One barely slept. He spent most of his time in the small quarters they had been given on the neutral station, watching Tae-min, and worrying about the future. The young Velthani seemed to sense his anxiety and stayed close, sometimes putting a gentle hand on his arm as if to say everything would be okay. Ji-hai worked constantly, reviewing her data one more time to make sure she had not missed anything. Hannah prepared additional legal arguments, planning for every possible outcome. None of them talked much about what would happen if they lost. On the morning of the 3rd day, they returned to the tribunal chamber. The room was more crowded this time. News of the hearing had spread, and many beings from different species had come to observe. Some supported Day One. Others supported Ha-jin. Everyone wanted to see how this would end. Tae-min walked between Day One and Hannah, head held high despite the stares. The young Velthani had grown braver over the past few days, or perhaps just more determined. The 3 judges entered and took their seats. Judge Remshala looked as calm as before. Judge Sung-ho appeared tired, as if he had not slept much either. Judge Boare, the Velthani elder, had an expression that was hard to read. We have completed our deliberations, Judge Remshala announced. Her voice echoed in the silent chamber. Before we deliver our ruling, we have questions for both sides. Ha-jin stood up, confident and composed. Day One felt his stomach twist with nervousness. Dr. Ji-hai Park, Judge Sung-ho said, you testified that albino Velthani carry no genetic defects. But the Velthani have believed otherwise for 3,000 years. How can you be certain your analysis is correct? Ji-hai stood and bowed respectfully. I cannot speak for what the Velthani believed in the past, but I can speak for what the genetic data shows now. I have analyzed Tae-min's DNA completely. There are no mutations that cause disease or weakness. The only difference is a pigmentation gene. That is all. But what if you are wrong? Judge Sung-ho pressed. What if there are long-term effects you cannot detect yet? Then we will discover them, Ji-hai said. But we cannot condemn a child to death based on fear of what might happen. We can only act on what we know. And what we know is that Tae-min is healthy. Judge Boré spoke next, addressing Hajin. Broodkeeper Hajin, you have defended this practice as necessary for the survival of your species. But can you provide any recent medical evidence that supports this claim? Hajin hesitated for just a moment. The evidence is in our history, in our traditions. That is not what I asked. Judge Boré said firmly. Do you have current medical data that proves albino Velthani are dangerous? The burden of proof should not be on us, Hajin said, his voice growing heated. This is our culture, our right to determine our own practices, even when those practices involve the death of children? Judge Boré asked quietly. Hajin's scales darkened with anger. You are Velthani. How can you side with the humans against your own people? I am not siding with anyone, Judge Boré said. I am trying to find the truth. That is my duty as a judge. The tension in the room was thick. Several Velthani in the observation area were making angry sounds. They felt betrayed by Judge Boré's questions. Judge Remshala raised her hand for silence. We have one more question. For Taemin. Everyone turned to look at the young Velthani. Taemin stood up slowly, using the translation device. Taemin, Judge Remshala said gently, if we allow you to live, you will face many challenges. Some Velthani will never accept you. They will see you as an aberration, as something wrong. Life will not be easy. Do you understand this? Taemin was quiet for a moment. Then the young Velthani spoke, the translator turning the words into both human and Velthani languages. I already know I am different. I see it every day when I look at my scales. But different does not mean wrong. Day one taught me that. He found me when I was dying, and he did not see an aberration. He saw someone who needed help. If some Velthani cannot accept me, that is their choice. But it should be my choice whether I try to live or not. No one else should make that choice for me. The words hung in the air. Even Hajin seemed momentarily at a loss for how to respond. Judge Remshala nodded slowly. Thank you, Taemin. You may sit. The three judges turned to each other and spoke quietly for several minutes. The entire chamber waited in tense silence. Day one reached over and took Taemin's hand. The young Velthani squeezed back. Finally, Judge Remshala turned to face the chamber. We have reached our decision. Day one's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. This has been a difficult case, Judge Remshala said. We have had to balance cultural sovereignty with individual rights, tradition with evidence, fear with hope. She paused. After careful consideration, we have reached a split decision. A split decision. That meant the judges did not all agree. Day one felt a flicker of hope mixed with dread. Judge Sungho and I agree on the following ruling. Judge Remshala continued. Taemin cannot be forcibly returned to the Velthani for the purpose of execution or abandonment. The genetic evidence shows no justification for this practice. However, we also recognize the complexity of interfering with indigenous cultural practices. Hajin's expression was dark with fury. Several Velthani in the observation area began shouting protests. Judge Remshala waited for silence before continuing. Therefore, our ruling is this. Taemin will be given a choice. The young Velthani may choose to remain with the humans who rescued them or choose to join Velthani society. This choice must be made freely, without coercion. Additionally, we are mandating a comprehensive genetic study of albino Velthani genetics to be conducted over the next 5 years. If the study confirms that there are no harmful genetic effects, the Velthani Council must review their abandonment practice. This is an outrage, Hajin said. Standing up, you are forcing us to change our ways based on human interference. We are forcing nothing, Judge Remshala said calmly. We are asking you to examine your beliefs with modern evidence. If the evidence supports your tradition, nothing will change. If it does not, then perhaps the tradition should be questioned. And what my vote? Judge Boré asked quietly. Judge Boré voted differently, Judge Remshala acknowledged. She believes the practice should be ended immediately, with no waiting period for study. However, she was outvoted. Judge Boré stood and looked directly at Hajin. I am Velthani. I have lived 800 years. I remember stories my grandparents told me, stories of when albinos were not seen as cursed. We lost something when we chose fear over compassion. I hope we can find it again. Hajin said nothing. He simply turned and walked out of the chamber. Several other Velthani followed him, their anger obvious. But not all of them left. Kyungmin remained in his seat. So did a few others, mostly younger Velthani who looked thoughtful rather than angry. Judge Remshala finished the proceedings. Taemin, you have 1 year to make your choice. During this time, you may explore both options. Learn about your heritage. Learn about the humans who saved you. Then decide where you belong. This tribunal is concluded. As everyone stood to leave, Day One felt overwhelmed. They had won, in a way. Taemin was safe. But the ruling was not as clear-cut as he had hoped. What do you think? He asked Taemin quietly. The young Velfani looked up at him with those amber eyes. I think I need to learn about my people. I need to understand what I am before I can choose. That is very wise, Hannah said, joining them, and very brave. Jihai approached with news. Several Velfani scientists have already contacted me. They want to help with the genetic study. Not everyone agrees with Hajin. That is good, Day One said. But his heart felt heavy. He knew what was coming. Taemin needed to spend time with the Velfani. That meant they would be separated. Outside the chamber, Kyung-min was waiting. The engineer approached cautiously, as if expecting to be rejected. I want to apologize, Kyung-min said. When I reported seeing the Albino Hatchling, I did not think about what would happen. I only thought about duty. You did what you believed was right, Day One said. I cannot blame you for that. Perhaps, Kyung-min said. But watching this hearing made me think, made me question. He looked at Taemin. There is a group of us, Velfani, who are not comfortable with the old ways. We would be willing to host a hatchling in our district to teach them about our culture, if that is acceptable. Taemin looked at Day One, waiting for his opinion. It is not my choice, Day One said gently. It is yours, Taemin. The young Velfani thought for a moment, then spoke through the translator. I want to learn. I want to understand my people. But I also want to stay connected to Day One. Is that possible? Yes, Kyung-min said. You would live with us, but you could still communicate with the humans. We would not isolate you. Then I will try, Taemin said. Day One felt pride and sadness mixed together. Taemin was growing up, making difficult choices. That was what he had wanted, was it not? For Taemin to have a chance to choose their own path. But that did not make goodbye any easier. As they left the tribunal station, Day One made a promise to himself. He would give Taemin the space needed to explore Velfani culture, but he would also be there whenever the young one needed him. Some bonds transcended species. Some connections could not be broken by distance or time. Taemin had taught him that on the day he heard crying in the acid rain and chose to run toward it instead of away. Now it was time to see what Taemin would choose when given the same opportunity. The underground city was nothing like Day One station. It was vast, carved into the rock over thousands of years, with tunnels that stretched for kilometers in every direction. Lights glowed from bioluminescent plants that the Velfani cultivated. The air smelled different here, mineral and ancient. Taemin stood at the entrance, looking down into the depths. Day One stood beside them, carrying the small bag of belongings they had packed together. You do not have to do this, Day One said quietly. You can stay with me. No one would blame you. I know, Taemin said. The young Velfani's language skills had improved greatly over the past months. But I need to understand where I come from, who my people are. I cannot make a real choice without knowing. Kyung-min approached from the tunnel entrance. Behind him was a female Velfani with kind eyes. This is Yoon Seo, Kyung-min said. She will be Taemin's primary teacher and guardian during this time. Yoon Seo bowed slightly to both Day One and Taemin. Welcome to our district. We have prepared quarters for you. Taemin, I hope you will be comfortable here. Thank you, Taemin said, returning the bow. The goodbye was harder than Day One expected. He knelt down so he was at level with Taemin. Remember, you can contact me anytime, day or night. If you need anything, if you are scared, if you just want to talk, I will be here. I know, Taemin said. Then the young Velfani did something unexpected. Taemin hugged him. It was awkward, as Velfani did not usually hug. But the gesture was clear. Day One hugged back, fighting the tightness in his throat. I am proud of you. Then Taemin turned and walked into the underground city with Yoon Seo and Kyung-min. Day One watched until the white scales disappeared into the darkness. The first weeks were difficult for Taemin. Everything was strange. The Velfani way of life was completely different from living with Day One. They ate different foods. They slept in different cycles. They had different customs and rules. And everyone stared. Taemin's white scales stood out dramatically against the dark greens and browns of the other Velfani. Some looked with curiosity, others with suspicion or disgust. A few children even threw rocks once when Unesio was not looking. But Unesio was patient and kind. She taught Taemin the history of the Velthani people, the old stories and legends. She explained the social structures and customs. She answered every question, no matter how basic. Why did they leave me? Taemin asked one night. It was a question that had haunted them since the beginning. Unesio was quiet for a long moment, because they were afraid. Fear makes people do terrible things, even to those they should protect. My own sibling was albino many years ago. I was just a hatchling myself, but I remember the crying. I remember the adults saying it was for the best. She looked at Taemin with sad eyes. I have questioned this practice my whole life, but I was too afraid to speak. You and the human engineer, you were braver than I was. Taemin learned that not all Velthani agreed with the old ways. There were others like Unesio and Kyungmin who had doubts but had stayed silent. Now, slowly, they were beginning to speak. 3 months passed. Taemin sent regular messages to Day One, telling him about life underground. The engineer always replied quickly, sharing news from the surface and asking questions about what Taemin was learning. Then Taemin made a discovery that changed everything. It happened during a routine maintenance check. Kyungmin had taken Taemin along to inspect some deep tunnels. The equipment they used to detect structural weaknesses was not working properly. The scanner is malfunctioning, Kyungmin said, frustrated. We will have to go back and get a replacement. Wait, Taemin said. I feel something. Feel what? A vibration. No, not a vibration. Something else. Taemin moved closer to the tunnel wall and placed both hands against it. There is something wrong with this section. The rock feels different. Kyungmin was skeptical, but he marked the location anyway. 2 days later, that section of tunnel collapsed. If Velthani had been working there, they would have been killed. Taemin's warning had saved lives. How did you know? Kyungmin asked, amazed. I do not know, Taemin admitted. I just felt it. They began testing. Unesio brought in other scientists. What they discovered was remarkable. Taemin could sense electromagnetic fields that other Velthani could not detect. The lack of pigmentation in the scales somehow made them more sensitive to subtle electrical charges in the rock. This is extraordinary, Unesio said, reviewing the data. In ancient times, before we had technology, this ability would have been invaluable for navigating the underground and avoiding dangerous areas. So the albino gene is not a defect, Kyungmin said slowly. It is an adaptation. Yes, Unesio confirmed. A rare one, but useful. The ancestors who created the abandonment practice did not understand this. They saw a difference and assumed it meant weakness. Word of the discovery spread through the Velthani community. Some dismissed it as human trickery, but others, especially the engineers and scientists, were intrigued. Kyungmin presented the findings to the Infrastructure Council, arguing that albino Velthani could help prevent tunnel collapses and save lives. It was not enough to change everyone's minds, but it was a start. 6 months after moving underground, Taemin had grown significantly. The young Velthani was now almost as tall as Day One, with strong limbs and confident movements. But more than a physical growth, Taemin had changed in other ways. There was a quiet determination in those amber eyes, a sense of purpose. Taemin contacted Day One and asked him to visit the underground city. When the engineer arrived, he was surprised by how much Taemin had changed. You look well, Day One said, smiling. I am well, Taemin replied. I have learned so much about my people, about myself, about what I can do. They walked through the tunnels together, Taemin pointing out different areas and explaining their significance. Other Velthani watched them pass. Some still looked hostile, but others nodded in greeting. Taemin had earned a measure of respect. I have made my decision, Taemin said finally. Day One felt his heart tighten. Tell me. I want to stay with the Velthani, Taemin said. This is where I belong. But I do not want to lose you either. You are family. You always will be. Day One nodded, trying to hide his sadness. I understand. You should be with your people. You do not understand, Taemin said gently. I am staying because I want to change things. Unesio and Kyungmin are helping me search for other abandoned albinos who might have survived. We think there might be others out there, hiding or living alone. I want to find them. I want to help them. That is a good goal, Day One said. And I want to be a bridge, Taemin continued, between Velthani and humans, between the old ways and new understanding. You taught me that kindness is not about where you come from. It is about the choices you make. I want to help my people learn that too. Day one felt pride swell in his chest. When did you become so wise? I learned from the best. Tae-min said with a sound that was almost like laughter. The official year of decision time ended. Tae-min formally announced the choice to remain with the Velthani. The human authorities accepted this, though some were disappointed. Ha-jin and the traditionalists claimed victory, saying the albino had realized where it truly belonged. But they did not understand what was really happening. Tae-min had become a symbol. Young Velthani, who had doubts about the old ways, now had someone to look up to. The genetic study continued, with more scientists joining the project. UNESCO started a quiet movement to question other harsh traditions, not just the abandonment practice. 5 years passed. Day one had moved to a different world for his work, but he and Tae-min remained in close contact. They sent messages several times a week and visited when they could. The genetic study results came back, just as Jihaya predicted. There were no harmful mutations in albino Velthani genetics. The trait was simply a variation, rare but not dangerous. In fact, the electromagnetic sensitivity that Tae-min had demonstrated was confirmed to be a real phenomenon linked to the lack of pigmentation. The Velthani Council was forced to review the abandonment practice. It was not an easy process. Traditionalists fought hard to maintain the old ways, but the evidence was impossible to ignore. More importantly, younger Velthani were demanding change. Finally, after months of debate, the council made their announcement. The abandonment practice would end. Albino hatchlings would be protected and raised like any other children. The first legally protected albino hatchling was born 3 months after the announcement. The parents, nervous but determined, named their child Tae-min. When Day One heard this, he cried. Tae-min had indeed found 3 other surviving albinos during those 5 years. All of them had been hidden by sympathetic Velthani, who could not bring themselves to follow tradition. Now they could live openly. Tae-min helped them adjust to society and taught them about their unique abilities. One evening, as another acid rain season approached, Day One received a message from Tae-min. He opened it on his quarters in a station light years away from Veldar. My friend, the message read, I am watching the breeding grounds today. The adults are collecting the hatchlings before the rain comes. This time, every single one is being brought inside. I see 2 small, white ones among them. The parents are holding them close, protecting them. It is everything we hoped for. You ran into the rain when no one else would. You taught me that kindness is not cultural. It is a choice. I am choosing it every day. I am teaching others to choose it too. The change is slow, but it is real. Thank you for giving me the chance to make a difference. You will always be my first family. With love, Tae-min. Day One read the message 3 times. Then he looked out his window at the stars and smiled. Somewhere out there, on a harsh world with acid rain and underground cities, a young albino Velthani was changing the world one choice at a time. And it all started because one human engineer heard a cry for help and decided to run toward it instead of away. Some bonds transcended species. Some choices echoed across generations. And sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply care when it would have been easier not to.